I cannot tell you how excited I am to be here. I was just talking about the fact that there's not a lot of women of color conferences on the West Coast, right? You can go to kind of the East Coast and see some of that, but there's not a lot of, especially in leadership. So really excited to be here today, especially with my esteemed panel. So really quickly, I'll just give you their name and titles, but I'll have them introduce themselves with their story in a bit. So as Cindy mentioned, I'm LaFawn Bailey. I'm the Global Head of Culture and Inclusion at PayPal. I have Helen Lowe, SVP of Content and Digital Marketing at Charles Schwab. Noni Allwood, VP and Senior Fellow at the Center for Talent Innovation. Suni Lobo, Managing Director of Talent Development at Silicon Valley Bank. And Madelyn Mackie, Career Associate at Lee Hecht Harrison. Everyone, please welcome our panel this morning. All right, so as I mentioned, I'm the Global Head of Culture and Inclusion in PayPal, and what that means, it's a kind of a weird title. People go, that sounds great, but what is it? What it is PayPal is a 17-year-old company, but since separating from eBay Inc., we get the chance to act like a startup. So we now get to define who we want to be when we grow up, what our values are, and those values are around collaboration, innovation, wellness, and inclusion. So of course, diversity is a big part of that. I've been in diversity and inclusion for about a decade now. Especially in the Silicon Valley. I grew up in San Jose, California, which is rare to meet someone from the Bay Area, still in the Bay Area. So I say that just like someone might say, I'm from China or I'm from Russia. It's rare to meet somebody actually from the Bay Area. So how many of you all know what intersectionality is? All right, a few, even in the back, okay. So it's one of those terms where people go, oh, that sounds interesting, what is it? I'm gonna read you the definition of it, or one of the definitions of it. See, the Oxford Dictionary defines intersectionality as the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. Did that give everybody more clarity? Probably not. All right. So what it really means is that we all have layers, right? We all have layers that really lend to the lens that we have by which we see the world. It affects the way we bring ourselves to work. It affects our leadership styles, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm a woman, in case you guys couldn't tell, but I'm a Black woman. I'm also the mother of a 17-year-old who is killing me right now. Killing me. And if you're a parent of a teenager, you know how to lead. I don't care what anybody says, you're automatically a leader. I'm the mother of an aging parent. You know, I have a particular lens that has actually affected the kind of career I went into. It's affected the way that I see the world. It has when things happen socially, it actually impacts me. One of the things that I'll share a personal story before I have the ladies share a personal story. So I was explaining to one of my teammates, with all the stuff that is happening in our country right now, the fact that I have a 17-year-old Black man that I am raising actually changes the lens by which I come to work. I wake up with particular worries that my colleagues might not, and I go to sleep with the same. And so I had to tell my colleagues that, because just in case I look a little extra stressed when I come in, or just in case they're not quite sure if something is bothering me, I had to tell them that so that they understood this is a lens that I have that you all might not, and it does affect the way that I bring myself to work. So it's just giving you a glimpse into how our social pressures, the things that are happening, how we grew up, where we grew up, all of those things actually lend to the different layers of our makeup. That's all intersectionality is. So with that, I would love for my panel to introduce themselves a little bit more, tell the people who you are, and we'll start.
Hi, I'm Noni Allwood. I am a Latina. I am also a mother and a grandmother of a 12-year-old who's about to kill me. Yeah, he will. Young. Oh, yeah. He's about. I'm going to give him 6 months. I'm also an engineer. I am also a person that has immigrated to this country. And I'm going to say that one of the experiences, like LaFawn explaining, we're all going to hear, is that all these layers define, and they are interesting, it's like a little bit like a portfolio. At some point, one of those layers will be more important or more relevant or more vulnerable than others. But at some point, one of those layers is going to give us privilege. One of those layers is going to make us have more influence than others. So, because we're not always at a disadvantage or always at an advantage. It depends on the situation. It depends what we do with the privilege. So one thing that comes to mind in my little story is that being an immigrant is very interesting because you do everything to integrate and feel like this is your country. And I must admit that this year has been really hard for me because for once in 30 years I've been here, I've never felt like I'm not from here. Probably as a political discourse that labels Latinos as criminals, rapists, and drug dealers. Probably is the fact that we're being accused for, every single problem in this country is because of all these immigrants coming from Central America. By the way, the net immigration from Central America and South America this year is 0. As many people leave as people come. So the myth that we're invading this country is not true. So the point to say is that at some point you have, as an immigrant, I guess my experience has been always trying to feel like I belong. And sometimes I've been very successful and sometimes I haven't. But also that experience of not being an outsider has allowed me to have a point of view that is fairly, that has been very useful for the companies that I've worked for and the teams that I've led and the work that I've done. I bring a perspective that I think has been immensely valuable because there's nothing else. I'm looking at the world a little bit on the outside, and I realize now 30 years later that I still have that that lens that allows me to look both from the within and from the outside.
Wow. Good morning. My name is Madelyn Mackie, and my people are from Nolans, or as some of y'all will say, New Orleans. But I grew up in Toledo, Ohio. So the way I like to describe it is my father always said, work hard. But my mother said, work hard with style, young lady. And so when it came time for me to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up, I decided I was going to be a chemistry major. I was good at chemistry. You put hydrogen and oxygen together, you either got water or you blew things up. And I was a very linear thinker. So that worked for me because, see, I had a plan. And those of you with teenagers know we always have a plan. And my plan was to work in professional theater. But my parents had always said, you gotta get a real job. So I said, okay, I will be a chemistry education teacher and then take summers off and do summer stock theater, and I'll be the drama club instructor at the high school. But there was a little issue with all of that. I didn't like children. So about 3 years into my chemistry degree, and my parents were so excited, they put a plaque on my dorm door that said Madelyn Mackie, PhD, because they were so excited. But I wasn't excited. So after I wrote my first paper on the intercalation of an H2-tap porphyrin with a 1AA2AA prime DNA molecule, I know you've all read it. My mentors looked at me and said, this is great, what are you gonna do next? And I was like, not this. That's not what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. It wasn't what I loved. So I decided I was gonna be a theater major anyway. And I spent the next 15 years working at professional theaters all across the country, including 4 Tony Award-winning theaters. My last theater job, I was the associate production manager at Berkeley Repertory Theater. But after 15 years of it, I didn't love it anymore. I was getting a little burnt out. I was getting jaded, and that question of what do you want to be when you grow up came up again. And I was volunteering at the American Red Cross. I was giving back to my community. I loved the work. It took some convincing, and eventually the Red Cross hired me. And within 18 months, I was promoted to an officer position. And people were always asking me, Madelyn, how did you go from the chemistry lab to the stage to being an officer at a national nonprofit? And I would tell them my story, and I'd say, oh, well, you just did this, and you did this, and you had mentors, and you found your tribe, and you revised your resume, and you just did it. And they'd say, well, can I hire you to do that for me? Will you write my resume? Will you help me figure out what I want to be when I grow up? And people kept asking me that, and suddenly I realized there was a new career for me. And so I got my certification as a certified career management coach, a professional resume writer, and started working at Hecht Harrison, which is a global career management firm. And I help people figure out what do they want to be when they grew up, especially when that change may be forced on them and it's not your choice to leave your job. And I'd say my perspective is, and sometimes my clients hate this, is I go, well, you gotta change, whether you're ready for it or not. And for me, it's all about how did I change? How did I transition? How did I get unstuck into doing what I had always done? And so when I'm going into whether I'm a manager, whether I'm a coach, I'm a single African American in the East Bay, wherever I'm coming, it's all about how do I change? How do I adjust to the scenario? Who am I today? And that's always gonna change.
Wow, that is a hard act to follow. I wish I had been in theater. I'm Helen Lowe, and I am so happy to be here today. This is a topic that I wouldn't have thought of myself if I wasn't invited to speak on this panel, which is really a question of who I really am and which part of me do I think about every day? What do I bring to work? What do I bring home? And it's a really complicated question. I would say, first of all, I'm really, really proud to be an immigrant. So just as Noni said, it brings a lot of different things to my life that I don't think about. So grit is in, right? Have you guys read about that? Grit is in, yes. So immigrants have a lot of grit. And looking back in my life, I think I probably wouldn't give that up. The fact that I came here when I was 12, I didn't know any English. The only English phrase I knew was "Long live Chairman Mao," because I came from communist China. And the English teacher immediately said, "Helen, that is not a good thing to say. You might want to stop saying that." Yeah, and my family, we basically started from the bottom. We had no money, we had no safety net, and just came to San Francisco literally because of the American dream. Like, wow, the Golden Gate, this is like the place to go. And so when we left China, we came here and we didn't know anybody. So that's where I started. And I would say for the first 20 years of my life, I really didn't like it. I felt like I was an outsider. I felt like I was an underdog. I'm always trying to fit in and not succeeding that well, at least in my own mind. It wasn't until recently, I would say, after I became somewhat successful and felt confident about myself, that I realized that it's really a gift to have that sort of outside perspective and to be able to feel like, hey, I'm an underdog, but I can do this. And it really brings this idea of challenging the status quo to work every day. And then I realized, wow, that's a good thing I'm in marketing, because in marketing, innovation is all about thinking differently, reframing the problem, thinking about consumers' needs in a different way. And so then I realized, wow, that is really good that I have that perspective. But then the trick is, how do I communicate to others about who I am? Because one of the liabilities of being an underdog is, well, at least for me, I try to hide who I am and try to fit in with the mainstream, right? Because the culture is not made by the underdog. So I understood that really early on. And so people always felt like, Helen's really aloof. She never talks to anyone. She's kind of arrogant. We don't know who she is. And that really hurt me as a leader. To build trust, we all know that, right? It's so important to connect on a personal level and not just as a competent professional. And so as I became more of a senior leader, that became more obvious to me. So ironically, I had to turn my underdog, challenger, status quo kind of identity inside out and learn to talk about it and share like I'm sharing now and say, this is who I really am. And I used to be afraid to tell you who I am. And now I'm really proud to tell you who I am. And I hope that by doing that, I can connect you with you more personally. And by doing that, you will too share who you are with me. And that's a journey I'm still on. So, and that's a lesson that I think a lot of immigrants have. And I'm just so excited to connect with all of you today.
Awesome, thank you. Wow, these are all hard acts to follow. So I can see people both from my current life at SVB and my previous life at Cisco. So hey to everyone, and I'm glad to see everyone in the audience actually. My name is Suni Lobo, and I lead talent development at SVB. And when I was thinking about how I would introduce myself, it really kind of took me a lot of time this morning on my drive in. What do I say I am? Who am I? And there's so many layers and complexity to each one of us. My story is very interesting. I grew up in India. I'm obviously Indian. And then I moved to Australia to do an MBA and do some more work in HR. And it was interesting because my cultural background, as most Indians know and Asians know in the audience, my parents, when I said to my parents earlier on, I wanted to do HR, I think I was about 16 and I got exposed to HR work and OD work through school. And I said, I think this is what I want to do. And my mom said, that's not a real profession. You need to be an engineer or a doctor, right? I mean, why would you want to do HR? So it was very interesting, and I had a conversation with my parents, and I decided, actually, in hindsight, it was a great decision to do accounting because that was kind of a profession, right? So I did my bachelor's and my master's in accounting. It's crazy. So we go down these interesting paths depending on our background. And then I went to do HR. I went to Australia, and that's when I kind of followed my true passion. But it's been great for me because I understand business as a result. So I'm able to have a conversation with business leaders, which is so essential, as all of us in HR know. So, that's kind of one aspect. And then when I moved to Australia, we talk about fitting in. And I always think about that when, with my experience in Australia. And I think of myself as Indian Australian because I grew up in Australia. My professional career was in Australia. And Australia is a small country with not much immigration. So I definitely needed to fit in. And I felt that from the time I got in. And so I became very Aussie, actually, and unconsciously so. The way I dressed, the way I spoke, the way I, went to the pub for a beer. It was very much wanting to fit in. Now when I look back, I think about all of the things that I did to fit in unconsciously. I had my own radio show in Australia, so theatre is something that is quite common to all of us. And I talked about global women's issues actually every Wednesday evening at 8:30. And it was a great opportunity for me to kind of explore other aspects of my personality. And I actually saw that I didn't need to fit in that much anymore. I had so much greatness that I could bring to the table from my cultural background, and I didn't need to be Australian or whatever it was, right? Whatever the need of the hour was. So that's a small story, but I remember ANZ Bank, which is the bank I worked for in Australia, sent me to New Zealand for a stint. And I got off the flight in New Zealand, and I went in to meet my new team, who were all, actually, they were all white Kiwis. There were a couple of men, lots of women, and we had to fly the very same day to Wellington to negotiate with the union. This was very interesting, right? So I went into Wellington to negotiate with the union. I didn't know anything about the labor laws in the country. I actually went to talk to all of the senior leaders at the bank in New Zealand. And when I looked out into the audience, there were 80 people, of which about 65 were men. And they were all white New Zealanders. So it was very interesting for me to actually be in that situation. I always remember it as a defining moment in my career because I spoke with a different accent. I didn't know anything about the country. I didn't know why I was there, actually. I thought, oh, this is a cool job. I mean, I should take it for a couple, I'll do it for maybe a year. And it was the most interesting experience of my life to speak to the leaders, to talk to them about ANZ, but I didn't know anything about their culture. And I thought that I'd get an automatic rejection, right? Because I didn't feel any warmth. I didn't feel any kind of feeling of camaraderie with them. But long story short, we had a great conversation, and they invited me for dinner, and I stayed overnight. I was not meant to, and I had a great experience in New Zealand. But one of the things that it taught me was that we are more common than uncommon, right? We have more commonality. And I've lived in Beijing, London, Singapore, Hong Kong, New Zealand, Australia, and now the US. So I've lived all over the world. Lived and worked all over the world. And the one thing that I've found is when you connect with people on a personal level, and you make that effort to connect with them on a personal level. Sometimes it comes naturally to us, sometimes it's learned behavior. The relationships are the lasting factor in your career, and they'll take you on in your career, and take you forward. So, that's some of the examples, some of the stories, but I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about other aspects.
We're going to keep doing a little dance with this one mic up here. So those are great examples of what this topic is all about. Oh, we get another one. Look at that. So I shared a little bit about, why I wanted to do this topic and kind of the lens that it lends me to. Intersectionality absolutely affects the way that we lead, right? When we have an understanding that everyone has layers, it affects how we might approach people, the connections we might make, and some of the ladies definitely shared some of their experiences today. Helen mentioned grit, which is something that, every leader is supposed to have in some way. But I think how we look at that is definitely in my line of work, right? So the notion of quiet leadership. Everyone doesn't have to be extroverted. Everyone doesn't have to be boisterous, right? The fact that you should understand the points of view of everyone in the room, regardless of background or level or where they're coming from. That's really around diversity, inclusion, intersectionality, all of those great things. So I would love for Noni to share how the awareness and understanding of intersectionality affects you as a leader and maybe through your path of becoming a leader.
So one of the pieces of research that we did with the center last year, 2 years, maybe 3 years ago, is around innovation. And in that research, we point out two kinds of diversity. One of them is our inherent diversity, those dimensions that we can't change. My skin color, my voice, my socioeconomic upbringing, that impacts me and I can't do anything about it. In many regards, religion, in many sexual orientation, gender. But there's other dimensions, which is called acquired diversity, which is the one you gain through your experiences, the jobs you've had, the languages you speak, the countries you've lived in, the military experience, having brothers or having sisters. It just shapes who you are. And what happens is if you only have one kind of diversity, if you only have, let's say, inherent diversity, let's say we have a room full of white women, the conversation might be interesting, but at some point it's gonna be the same. Because some of those points of view are going to be the same. So when you hear companies saying we need to bring more women, it's not necessarily the only answer. It's just a little bit of the answer. Because if you bring women who act and think like the guys, you gain nothing for innovation purposes. The second thing is acquired diversity, which is if you are, let's say you are on the incumbent side, you're a Caucasian male, you're in charge, and there's a lot of those in charge. But you've traveled around the world and you have girls at home and you've grown in a place that was very diverse. You will have a point of view that allows you to appreciate what inherent diversity brings. So I think that when we look at ourselves, we need to look at ourselves not only that we are different, but also that we need to appreciate differences among others. And because that's the only way when companies can really get the best out of innovation. One last piece of information that I think is really important, particularly if you are in the technology. When we did the research, 56% of the respondents indicated that leaders don't endorse ideas they cannot personally relate to. What that means, and for the ladies in the room, is this the reason perhaps why we don't have a place to put our purse in the cars, because we're probably designed by male engineers. Or the fact that those great little microphones that you put here have that device that, God forbid, you have a dress, you gotta stick it here, carry in your hand. That's the point. That is the point. So the point for all of us is that when you're bringing ideas in engineering, for example, and you want your ideas to be heard, sometimes your ideas will be lost because the person who endorses those ideas doesn't have the vision to say, maybe I don't relate to the idea, but I don't know what I don't know. So when you're speaking up and you want to endorse, and this is what companies are missing out on, is the fact that you all bring ideas that nobody else would bring, but yet they're being tossed away because they're going, I don't need a place to put my purse because I don't have a purse. So that kind of mindset is and that I think is what we find in the workplace with all the different dimensions that we are, is that we bring this rich portfolio of ideas and thoughts. And so the mission here is not only for us to find a way, but also for us to hear the other ideas, because we have, by the intersectionality, it gives us an incredible amount of power and vision and the ability to appreciate different ideas. So intersectionality is actually a fantastic thing for innovation.
Wonderful. Madelyn, would you like to?
So with me in intersectionality and leadership, it always depends on who the audience I have in front of me and where they're coming from. So I'm single. I have no children. I live in an apartment. I live in Lake Merritt in Oakland. So I know no matter what, I'm going to be able to pay my rent every month. So when I started my business, the only person I had to depend on was me and take care of me and the cat, Prince Malcolm Shabazz, but he'd be all right. So when I started career coaching, I suddenly had to open my mind up, because not everyone's coming from this perspective of, if I lose my income, how am I going to take care of my family? And so sometimes when I do coaching and I have clients that come to me and they're in an absolute panic and they're like, can you write my resume in 24 hours because I have to find a job by the end of the week? And I'm like, what's going on? Let's slow things down. Yes, I can write your resume, but we got to slow things down and find out what's going on. And that key part of listening to other individuals. You know, part of being a leader is you got to slow down and you got to listen. And when I have a client and she says, well, I'm the only breadwinner in my home. My husband's disabled. He's on my health insurance, and I only have 30 days. And so I need to find a job as soon as possible because I know there's a wait period before my new health benefits can start, and he's going through chemotherapy right now. And so I'm listening, as another woman, with this responsibility you listen with your empathetic side. And then I'm a problem solver of turning that leadership on of, okay, how do we solve this? The answer may not be finding you another job. It's finding you other resources and tools and calling on my community to help me. Here's the scenario. How do we help solve it? Because for me, being a leader, it's that intersectionality of, I may not have all the answers, I may not have the right perspective, but I know people in my tribe who may be able to help. So it's really sometimes listening, slowing down, and then asking for help for each other, because that's how we can make a difference and that's how we can have an impact.
Oh, well, I was going to maybe talk about something else, but that's okay. So when I think about intersectionality, again, it's a new word for me, but I think I appreciate the meaning of it. Oftentimes, I associate with sort of being a victim. So this is my experience. I don't know if you guys had this. You know, I'm an Asian American woman, obviously, very short, don't take up much space, like nearly invisible. So when I speak up about diversity, everyone's going, oh, there she is, Helen talking about diversity, right? I don't want that, because that's not why I'm speaking up. I'm not speaking up for myself. I'm not even speaking up for, you know, all the Asian American women. I'm probably making a point about how diversity can help with innovation, how by listening to our customers of various backgrounds, we can maybe drive business results better. So all I want is for my team to be able to do a project to drive business. But instead, I may be coming across to others as, there she goes again, talking about diversity because she's a minority woman. So what I have learned over time is to actually get outside of that and just look at the result that I want. And that's why I'm particularly energized about things like design thinking. Have you guys heard about that, obviously, right? Like, what is design thinking? Design thinking is about empathy, starting with empathy. Don't start with your product. Don't start with the highest paid person in the room's opinion, but get outside of ourselves and go actually talk to some customers, go talk to some real people, walk on the street. That helps all of us, right? And what that really helps is it is no longer my opinion. that nobody wants to listen to. It's no longer even my team's opinion, but instead I'm galvanizing my team to galvanize all of our partners and people we work with and say, you know what, don't listen to ourselves. Go listen to those other people whose opinions really matter. And I think that introduces the kind of diversity and the kind of listening that then helps everybody listen to each other. And that, at the end of the day, I think benefits those of us who may be less heard in the room, because it's an acquired skill. And if we can encourage everybody to acquire that skill, not for the benefit of me, but for the benefit of the company and for the benefit of the customer, maybe that acquired skill can come back to benefit all of us. You have a mic. She's got her own mic.
I have my own mic. That's good.
She's a radio show. That's why she's got one.
Thinking about leadership, I think, that's something that we talked about. I'm really passionate about hiring different people, diverse people, right? I don't know whether the word is diverse, whether, I just look at different skills that people can bring to the table, right? I mean, there's a lot of commonality in the way that and I talked about commonality earlier. And there's a lot of different experiences that people bring to the table. So when I joined SVB about just 18 months ago, I had the chance to build my team, which is really cool. You don't get that often in your career. I have, as I call, a Christmas card list. And this is a really important list, guys. All of us should have a Christmas card list as leaders. A list of people that we know are awesome, that might have crossed our paths, and we want to give them an opportunity, whether they've been in our field or not. And I did tap into my Christmas card list, both within the company and outside the company, right? And I've had a chance to build this team that I think is really cool, and some of my team here in the audience, they've come from within SVB, from the business in SVB, from SVB, which is the company that I work for those who don't know, it's Silicon Valley Bank. And also from my old employer, which was Cisco, right? So one of the things that I did when I came into SVB, I wanted to hire someone from Israel, based in Israel. Now, luckily, we have an office in Israel, but when I floated the idea to folks in the executive team, on the leadership team, they were like, why would you want to hire someone in Israel? We have so many skills in the HR arena in the Bay Area. Why would you want to go to Israel? And I was like, this person is the best at what he does. And I really want to make sure that he can bring his greatness to SVB. And he's not a career HR person, actually. He's a business person. Long story short, it took me 8 months, probably about a year. And we did hire him. He's based in Israel. But he brings so much to my team because of the fact that he comes from a completely different perspective, right? But what it makes us do is also think about having someone else in a different time zone and being inclusive, and he's part of a 5-person office, so, we want to make sure that he's included. But that is the theme in my team and in my leadership style that is really, really something that is a part of my value system, right? Building diverse teams and actually doing it, not just talking about it. And it's tough to have a diverse team because, as you know, when people are not like you, someone talked about the fact that, when someone's not like you, it's harder, right? It's harder to be a leader when someone's not like you. But I just love it, and it brings innovation, creativity. We talked about design thinking. We launched design thinking at SVB with Stanford for our top talent. We've been doing so much creative and innovative work, and I think it's because of the fact, I believe it's because of the fact that we have people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different nationalities, and who live globally, who can bring a global element to the innovation and the innovative work we're doing in HR and in talent development. So that's something that's a huge passion of mine, and I do agree that innovation actually comes from having differences in thought and ideas, because you're always exposed to things that you've never thought about in the first place. And our natural predisposition is to shut down and say no when we hear a new idea, and to turn that idea or to turn that predisposition to saying yes, and let's actually talk a little bit more about it or listen on a deeper level, or put yourself in that person's shoes is the key to being a really good leader, I think.
So what I'm hearing from all of these leaders today is, through their leadership story, and definitely through my own, when you're even hiring people, when you're looking for people to join your team, it's really about culture contribution, not about culture fit. You don't need people to fit into what you already have. You need people to contribute to it and make it better. And then as you think about, the business case for diversity, or as we talk about intersectionality here, it's not about that in particular. It's about innovation. So, at PayPal, we talk about things like putting the customer at the center of everything we do and being customer champions. And what that movement has done is, we have these big war rooms where everything's pasted on the wall and we're looking at the customer experience end to end, right? What do they have to do when they press that button? And what happens when they go here? And then what is this process over there? Really what that is understanding all of the layers of our customers. Well, who are they? And what are they really doing? And what are the habits? That's really what this is all about, understanding people to the point where you can work better together, create better products and services, hire better teams, right? That's really what intersectionality is all about. Be your authentic self. I don't believe the phrase, bring your whole selves to work. Bring your best selves to work. I don't bring my whole self to work. You guys don't need to see all of that. But I will bring my best self to work, and that's what you all should try to do. Being authentic has never worked against me. It's never worked against me in my career. So if I give any advice to you, it is be your authentic self, bring your best self to work. And with that, we have to close our panel. So please thank our panelists, Noni, Madelyn, Helen, and Suni. Thank you so much.